When my daughter-in-law told me to stop calling so often, I smiled instead of crying. I didn't know what else to do. There's something about hearing those words from someone your son loves. It's like a gentle slap that leaves no mark, only silence. My name is Margaret Lewis, and I live in a small town just outside Portland, Oregon. I'm 62 years old, retired from teaching elementary school, and for the most part, I've lived a quiet, simple life. Until recently, that is. I used to believe that a mother's love was unshakable, that no matter how far her children went, that invisible thread would always stay strong. But threads wear thin. And one day, mine broke. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single moment when my son, Ethan, decided to stop calling me Mom. It happened slowly, like the way autumn creeps in. One day the trees are green, and before you know it, they're bare. I remember the last time he called me that. Mom. We were sitting at my kitchen table, the same one I've had since he was a boy. The afternoon light came through the lace curtains, and he was telling me about Anna, the woman he'd fallen in love with. His eyes lit up when he said her name, and I thought, this is what happiness looks like. I didn't know that happiness would soon build a wall between us. When he got married, everything changed. Not immediately, but slowly. Messages became shorter, calls less frequent, visits more rushed. At first I told myself it was normal. Every mother goes through this. Their sons grow up, start families, get busy. But there's a difference between busy and distant. And I started feeling the difference. The day I realized he had truly changed was the day I heard him call me Margaret. It was over the phone, a quick call, just before Thanksgiving. He said, Margaret, we might not make it home this year. He didn't even notice what he'd said, but I did, and it felt like the world had gone quiet. I stood there in the kitchen, holding the phone, staring at the old photo of him on the fridge. The one where he's 8 years old, wearing his baseball cap backward, smiling with missing teeth. And I thought, when did I stop being Mom? Before he stopped calling me Mom. When Ethan was a little boy, he used to run down the hallway in his socks, sliding across the wooden floor until he crashed into my legs. Every single morning. He'd laugh so hard and I'd scold him, pretending to be angry, but truthfully, I loved those moments. The sound of his laughter was what made that old house feel alive. We lived in a 2-story white house with green shutters, the kind you'd find in any quiet American suburb. The backyard had a small swing set and a maple tree where we used to hang Christmas lights every December. That house wasn't fancy, but it was ours. It held the story of a mother and son who grew up together. Me learning how to raise him, and him learning how to be in the world. Ethan was a bright kid, curious, thoughtful, always asking questions, the kind that made you pause. When his father left, Ethan was just 8 then. I thought he might change. But instead, he grew stronger, kinder, more protective. He would wipe my tears and say, "It's okay, Mom. You have me." Those words stayed with me for years. You have me. We had this little routine every Sunday. We'd go to St. Paul's Church in town, then grab pancakes at a small diner near the river. The waitress there, Nancy, used to give him extra whipped cream on his chocolate pancakes because she adored his smile. After breakfast, we'd walk along the riverside, watching the ducks and throwing bits of bread into the water. He'd hold my hand, even when he was 10 or 11. And every time he did, I thought, maybe I'm doing something right. When he got older, things naturally shifted. High school came with friends, sports, late-night study sessions. I'd wait up sometimes just to hear his car pull into the driveway. We'd talk for a few minutes before bed. Nothing deep, just the little things. Grades, his favorite band, the girl he liked. He still called me Mom. Always Mom. Then college happened. He went to Seattle University, a few hours' drive from home. I remember helping him pack. He wanted to bring everything. Books, guitar, old photos, even the worn-out baseball glove he'd had since childhood. That day, when I dropped him off at his dorm, I remember standing by the car, watching him carry boxes inside. He turned, waved, and said, "Love you, Mom. Don't cry, okay?" Of course, I cried the whole drive home. For the first time in years, the house felt empty. I'd walk past his room, and it would be so quiet it hurt. I left it untouched, posters still on the wall, his old high school hoodie on the chair, the faint smell of his cologne still in the air. It was my way of keeping him close. He called me every Sunday evening, without fail, sometimes from the library, sometimes from his tiny apartment. We'd talk about classes, girls, life. He told me he wanted to become a civil engineer. "Something practical, Mom," he said. I was so proud. Then one day during his junior year, he mentioned a girl named Anna. He said she was in his design class. Smart, beautiful, with this laugh that made people turn their heads. I could hear something different in his voice, softer, warmer. I smiled, even though I felt a tiny tug of worry, because I knew that's how it starts. A mother slowly begins to share her son's heart with someone else. The first time I met Anna was about a year later. She came home with him for Christmas. She was polite, elegant, from Chicago, I think. Her family had roots in old money, and she carried herself with the kind of grace that made me feel a bit small. Not intentionally, she wasn't rude, but everything about her, her perfect hair, her calm voice, her way of calling Ethan babe in every other sentence, made me realize I was entering a new chapter, one where I wasn't the center anymore. During dinner that night, I noticed how Ethan looked at her, full of admiration. It was the same way he used to look at me when he brought home his report cards, and I realized he was in love. After dinner, when we were clearing plates, Anna offered to help. We stood by the sink and she said, "You've raised a wonderful man, Mrs. Lewis." I smiled. "Thank you, dear. And please, call me Margaret." She smiled back, but something in her eyes told me she already did. That night, after they left to meet some of Ethan's old friends, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. Snow was falling softly outside. I looked at the photo frame on the mantel, Ethan as a baby wrapped in a blue blanket, and whispered, "Don't drift too far, my boy." The next few years felt like a slow drift. After college, he and Anna moved to Denver, Colorado. He got a good job. They married in a small ceremony, beautiful, intimate. I was there, sitting in the front row, watching him promise his heart to her, and I was happy. I truly was. But a quiet ache had started to grow inside me, the kind that mothers don't talk about because they're supposed to be proud, not lonely. He still called, but the rhythm changed. Once a week turned into once every 2 weeks, then once a month. I told myself, it's okay. He's busy. But I started counting the days between calls, and I started writing in a little journal, just one line each night. Ethan called today. Or Ethan didn't call. That journal became my way of keeping time. Sometimes I'd bake his favorite lemon pie and freeze half of it for when he visits. The pie would sit there for weeks, untouched. Every time I opened the freezer, it reminded me that maybe he wasn't coming that month after all. And yet, I waited, just like mothers do, because even when they stop calling, a mother's heart doesn't stop listening. When the calls got shorter, the first time Ethan missed my birthday call, I told myself it was just an accident. Maybe he was traveling, maybe his phone died, maybe he forgot what day it was. But deep down, I knew my son never forgot my birthday. Not once in 30 years. When I finally heard from him 2 days later, his voice sounded rushed. "Mom, I'm so sorry, work's been crazy," he said. And I heard the faint sound of laughter in the background. Anna's voice, soft but distinct. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said. "I know you're busy." He didn't notice the pause in my voice. He said something about a project deadline, about buying new furniture for their apartment, and before I could even tell him I missed him, he said, "I'll call you soon, Mom. Love you." The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a long while after that. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the evening light turned golden, touching the photo frames on the shelf. Ethan's graduation, his wedding, our trip to Cannon Beach years ago. I whispered into the silence, "I love you too." But there was no one left to hear it. A few months later, I decided to visit them in Denver. I hadn't seen them since the wedding, and I missed him terribly. I called first, of course. I wasn't the kind of mother who showed up unannounced. "Of course, Mom. We'd love to see you," Ethan said. I could tell by his tone he was being polite. It wasn't excitement, it was obligation. But I ignored that feeling. I packed my best clothes, a pale blue cardigan, the one he always said made me look fancy. I even bought a new pair of shoes from Macy's, because I wanted to look presentable, like the kind of mother his friends would be proud to meet. When I arrived, Anna greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked beautiful, as always, wearing a soft cream sweater and jeans that probably cost more than my entire outfit. The apartment was stunning. Modern furniture, white walls, paintings that looked like something from a gallery. Everything was perfect, except for the feeling that I didn't belong there. "Oh, Margaret, you didn't have to bring anything," Anna said when she saw the pie box in my hands. "Oh, it's just Ethan's favorite. Lemon meringue," I said, smiling. Her smile tightened a little. "He's been trying to cut down on sweets." Ethan appeared then, wrapping his arms around me in a quick hug. "Hey, Mom." I could feel how different that hug was. Shorter, lighter, distracted. When he pulled away, his phone buzzed, and he immediately glanced at it. "Sorry, work," he said, and walked into the kitchen. We had dinner that night. Grilled salmon, quinoa salad, wine. Anna talked about her new interior design firm, Ethan about his projects. I tried to join the conversation, but it was like I was sitting at a table where the language had changed. They talked about people I didn't know, restaurants I hadn't heard of, and a world I wasn't part of. When I mentioned my book club back home, Ethan smiled faintly and said, "That's cute, Mom." Cute. I don't think he realized how small that word made me feel. Later that evening, as I was about to go to bed, I heard them talking in the living room. Their voices were soft, but the apartment walls were thin. Anna said, "She's lovely, Ethan, but she still treats you like a kid. You need to set some boundaries." There was a pause. Then Ethan sighed. "Yeah, I know. She means well, but sometimes it's a bit much." I froze. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was just standing there holding my toothbrush, feeling like a stranger in my own son's life. I went back to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the framed wedding photo they'd left on the nightstand. In it, Ethan's hand rested on Anna's shoulder, and I stood beside them, smiling, unaware that someday even that smile would fade into the background. The next morning over breakfast, Anna said casually, "Margaret, I hope you don't mind if we keep Sundays for ourselves. It's kind of our couple day, you know?" I nodded. "Of course, dear, that's completely fine." Inside, it stung. Sundays were our days, mine and Ethan's. We'd always spoken or met every Sunday for years. But I didn't say that. I just smiled, the way mothers do when they're trying not to seem hurt. When I returned home a few days later, the house felt heavier than before. The clock ticked louder, the couch looked emptier, and even the sound of rain against the window reminded me of the distance between Denver and Portland. I opened the freezer and saw that same pie I'd made weeks earlier, untouched, just like before. Months passed. Sometimes Ethan would call, sometimes he wouldn't. I'd send him small texts. "How's work? Weather looks bad there, stay warm." Most times I'd get a short reply. "Thanks, Mom," or "All good here." I could feel my words floating into a space where they didn't quite land. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was early November, a chilly evening. I was knitting a scarf while watching the rain through the kitchen window. My phone rang, and I smiled when I saw his name. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice cheerful, but there was something practiced about it. We talked about the usual things: the weather, his work, Anna's family visiting for the holidays. Then, halfway through the call, I heard Anna's voice in the background. She said, "Ethan, dinner's getting cold, and tell her—" Then she stopped, lowered her voice, and said something I couldn't catch. Ethan hesitated. Then, with a nervous laugh, he said, Mom, maybe don't call every other day. It's just been kinda hectic here, and, Anna likes her quiet time after work." He said it kindly, but those words hit like cold water. I swallowed. "Of course, sweetheart. I understand." I said it with a smile, the kind that hides heartbreak. He didn't notice. He said something about calling next week and hung up. When the call ended, I sat there, phone still in my hand, the quiet pressing around me like a weight. I looked at the clock. 6:47 p.m. That's when I wrote in my journal, "He asked me to stop calling." For days, I tried to distract myself. I baked, I cleaned, I went to church, but everything reminded me of him. The sweater I knitted for his last birthday, the framed photo of his graduation, even the sound of the kettle whistling. He used to love tea. One Sunday, I went to church alone and stayed longer than usual. After the service, an older woman named Carol sat beside me. She'd been widowed for years and often talked about her children who lived in Texas. She looked at me and said, "You've got that look, Margaret, the kind only mothers wear when their hearts are tired." I smiled weakly. "He's just busy," I said. She patted my hand. "Busy is one thing. Forgetting who we are, that's another." That night I went home and reread my journal. Every entry, every Ethan called and Ethan didn't call, told me a story I didn't want to see. He was slipping away, and I was letting him, because I didn't want to push him further. Then came Thanksgiving. It was the first time in 35 years that I spent it alone. Ethan had called earlier in the week to say, "We might not make it home this year, Margaret." He didn't even notice that he'd said Margaret. That was the moment I knew something inside our bond had quietly broken. I cooked a small meal anyway. Turkey for one, mashed potatoes, a slice of pie. I set the table for two out of habit. When I sat down, I whispered a quiet grace, and in that silence I realized this was what it felt like to be replaced. And yet, even as tears filled my eyes, I still couldn't bring myself to blame him. I told myself, he's happy. Isn't that what I always wanted? But sometimes, loving someone means losing pieces of yourself along the way. And that night, as I washed the dishes alone, I whispered to the empty kitchen, "I hope he never feels what I feel right now." When silence became my company. Winter came early that year in Portland. The trees turned bare before Christmas, and the wind carried that sharp cold that seeps through the walls no matter how high you turn the heater. I'd started knitting scarves for the local shelter, just to keep my hands busy. When you live alone, you learn to fill the hours with noise, the hum of the TV, the kettle, the creak of the floorboards, anything to drown the silence. It had been 3 months since Ethan last called, 3 months since I'd heard his voice. The days had blurred together into a routine of waiting. Sometimes I'd catch myself glancing at the phone, as if my staring might make it ring. But it never did. Then one morning, while I was making tea, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It wasn't unbearable, but it was strong enough to make me drop the spoon. I sat down, breathing slowly, trying not to panic. I told myself it was just age, maybe I'd moved too quickly. But the pain lingered. I went to the doctor later that week. He ran some tests and said gently, "Margaret, your blood pressure is higher than it should be. You need rest, less stress." I laughed quietly. Less stress, doctor? I live alone. My biggest excitement is folding laundry. He smiled kindly but said, still, loneliness is a kind of stress too. When I got home, I wanted to call Ethan, just to hear him say, it's okay, Mom. You'll be fine. But then I remembered he'd asked me not to call so often, so I didn't. A week later, I received a Christmas card from Ethan and Anna. It was a printed one, with a photo of them in matching sweaters, standing in front of a fireplace. The message read, Merry Christmas, Margaret. Hope you're staying warm. Love, Ethan, Anna. No handwritten note, no mom, just Margaret. I placed it on the mantel beside the old family photo. Ethan as a toddler in my arms. The contrast was almost cruel. The boy who used to cling to me now looked out from a glossy postcard like a stranger. That night, I poured myself a cup of cocoa and sat in silence, the card beside me, the clock ticking louder than ever. By New Year's Eve, I decided I couldn't start another year in that emptiness. So I did something brave, or foolish, depending on how you look at it. I booked a flight to Denver. I told myself I'd surprise him, not in a dramatic way, just a simple visit. I'd knock on the door, smile, maybe cook dinner for them. I just wanted to feel like mom again, even for a weekend. I arrived on a cold Friday evening. The city was dusted with snow, twinkling with Christmas lights. I took a taxi to their neighborhood, a beautiful row of brick townhouses lined with white fences and wreaths on every door. When I reached their place, I hesitated at the doorstep. I could hear music inside, soft laughter, the clink of glasses. I smiled. Maybe they were having friends over. I didn't want to interrupt, but something in me said, "You've come this far. Knock." So I did. After a moment, the door opened. Anna stood there holding a wine glass. Her smile froze when she saw me. "Margaret?" she said, surprised. "Hello, dear," I said softly. "I was in town and thought I'd stop by. I should have called, I know." Before I could finish, Ethan appeared behind her, his expression shifting from shock to discomfort. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked quietly. The warmth in his voice, the kind that used to melt me, wasn't there anymore. "I just wanted to see you," I said. "It's been so long." He glanced at Anna, who looked uneasy. Then he said, "We're actually hosting some friends tonight. Maybe you could have called first." The words hit me harder than I expected. "I didn't mean to intrude," I whispered. "I just wanted to spend some time." Anna cut in gently. "It's just not a good time, Margaret. We've got a full house tonight." There it was again. Margaret. Not Mom, not even Mrs. Lewis. Just Margaret. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, I understand." I turned to leave, clutching the small bag of gifts I'd brought. A knitted scarf for Ethan, a scented candle for Anna. But Ethan called after me. "Mom, wait." For a second, my heart lifted. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he'd ask me in. He stepped forward, looking conflicted. "It's just, things are different now. Anna and I, we're trying to build our own space, our own rhythm, you know?" I looked at him, I really looked. His face had matured, but his eyes, they looked tired, uncertain. And suddenly I realized this wasn't just about me. He was torn between two worlds, and he didn't know how to keep both. I smiled gently. "I understand, Ethan. I really do." And then, before he could say anything else, I handed him the bag. "These are for you both. You can open them later." Then I walked away, down the snow-covered path, my footsteps the only sound in the night. I checked into a small motel nearby, the kind with faded carpets and the smell of old coffee in the lobby. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding my phone, debating whether to call him. But I didn't. I knew he wouldn't answer that night. I cried quietly. Not the loud, dramatic kind of crying, but the kind that comes in waves, silent and steady, like rain sliding down a window. It wasn't just sadness. It was the realization that something sacred had ended, the part of motherhood where your child still needs you. The next morning, I packed my bag and went to the airport. While waiting for my flight, I saw families everywhere, parents hugging grown children, laughter echoing across the terminal, and I thought, maybe this is how life works. We raise them, love them, and then they walk away to build something new. But why does it hurt so much to be happy for them? 2 days later, Ethan called. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said immediately. "I should have handled that better." I smiled softly, though he couldn't see it. "It's okay, sweetheart. I understand." "No, you don't," he said. I didn't know you were coming." Anna felt caught off guard. "We didn't mean to make you feel unwelcome." I wanted to tell him that welcome isn't something you ask for. It's something you feel. But I didn't say that. I just said, "You don't need to explain, Ethan. You have your own life now. I just needed to see you one more time." There was silence. Then he said quietly, "You'll always be my mom." It sounded rehearsed, like something he thought he should say, and yet it was enough to make my eyes fill again. After we hung up, I sat by the window watching the rain fall outside, the Portland rain that never really stops. And I realized something. I'd spent so long waiting for my son to come back to me that I'd forgotten how to live without him. The turning point wasn't the visit. It wasn't even the moment he called me Margaret. It was the quiet realization that my happiness couldn't depend on the sound of his voice. That evening, I opened my old journal and wrote one line that felt like a whisper of peace. "He may have stopped calling me Mom, but I will never stop being one." The quiet work of forgiveness. The new year began quietly. No grand resolutions, no confetti, just the hum of my old heater and a sky so gray it looked like it forgot how to shine. For the first time in a long while, I didn't wait by the phone. I didn't bake pies, just in case. I let silence be what it was. Silence. And strangely, it didn't hurt as much anymore. Maybe pain dulls with time, or maybe we just learn how to carry it better. I started filling my days again, volunteering at the library, joining a watercolor class at the community center, even baking for the church bazaar. People started calling me Maggie again, something I hadn't heard in years. It felt warm, like an old sweater you'd forgotten you owned. One morning, while painting a clumsy picture of tulips, I realized something simple but profound. For years, I'd built my entire identity around being Ethan's mom, but he had grown up, and I needed to grow too. Spring came early that year. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. I'd planted a few daffodils by the porch, my first attempt at gardening since Ethan left for college. Watching them bloom made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Contentment without reason. Sometimes I'd still miss him deeply, like when I'd walk past his old room or see families at the grocery store. But the pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was quieter, softer, like a scar that no longer aches but reminds you of where you've been. Then one Sunday afternoon, while I was folding laundry, the phone rang. I almost didn't recognize the number. It had been so long. But when I heard his voice, my heart still did that little flutter. "Hey, Mom," he said. Mom, not Margaret, not Mrs. Lewis, just Mom. It was such a small word, but it felt like sunlight breaking through the clouds. We talked for nearly an hour, about his work, about Denver's unpredictable weather, about the new project he was leading. Then, hesitantly, he said, "Anna's expecting." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, but not from sadness, from something deeper. "You're going to be a father," I whispered. He laughed softly. "Yeah, crazy, huh?" "Oh, Ethan," I said, my voice trembling. "You have no idea how proud I am of you." There was silence on the line, the comfortable kind, not the empty one we used to have. Then he said, "We'd love for you to visit once the baby's born. Anna. She's realized she might have been a little too protective before. We both have. I closed my eyes and let that moment wash over me. Forgiveness doesn't always arrive in grand apologies. Sometimes it comes in gentle invitations. I'd love that, I said softly. In the months that followed, Ethan called more often. Not every day, but enough. We started finding our rhythm again, sharing small pieces of our lives. He'd send photos of the nursery they were setting up, or ask for my old cookie recipe. It wasn't like before, but maybe it wasn't supposed to be. The day Anna went into labor, Ethan called from the hospital. "It's a girl," he said, his voice cracking. "Mom, she's beautiful." Tears filled my eyes instantly. "What's her name?" "Grace," he said. "We named her Grace Margaret Lewis." I pressed my hand over my mouth, speechless. He added quietly, "Anna wanted to. She said you've been nothing but grace through everything." That was the first time in years I cried, not from heartbreak, but from healing. A few weeks later, I flew to Denver again. This time, the welcome was different. When I stepped off the plane, Ethan was waiting for me at arrivals, holding a small bouquet of daisies. He looked nervous, like a boy again. When he hugged me, it wasn't the polite kind. It was real, full, trembling. At their home, Anna greeted me warmly. Her face was softer now, her eyes tired but kind. "Come in, Margaret. Or should I say Grandma?" she joked. I laughed, and that single sound seemed to melt the last bit of ice between us. She placed the baby in my arms. Tiny, warm, perfect. The moment I looked into Grace's little face, something in me bloomed again, something that had been dormant for years. "She looks just like Ethan did," I whispered. Anna smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." That weekend, we sat around the living room, me knitting, Anna dozing on the couch, Ethan quietly rocking Grace to sleep. It was peaceful, ordinary, and yet it felt sacred, not because everything had magically gone back to how it used to be, but because we'd all changed. And somehow, that change had made space for love to return. Before I left, Ethan walked me to the car. The sun was setting, painting the street in gold. He said softly, "I'm sorry, Mom, for the distance, for everything. I thought growing up meant cutting ties, but I was wrong." I touched his cheek. "You don't have to apologize. You were finding your way. That's what I raised you to do." He smiled, eyes glistening. "You've always been stronger than I realized." I laughed quietly. Mothers usually are. He hugged me again, and for the first time in years, it felt like home. When I returned to Portland, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt peaceful, like a place that had served its purpose, and now simply waited, content. Every Sunday, Ethan would call, not out of guilt, but love. Sometimes Anna joined, sometimes I'd just hear Grace babbling in the background, and every time my heart would soften all over again. One evening, as I watched the sunset from my porch, I thought about all those years of silence and longing. If I could go back, I'd tell my younger self one thing: don't mistake distance for the end of love. Sometimes it's just love learning how to live in new spaces. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a single moment. It's a quiet decision you make every day. To love without bitterness. To let go without losing faith. To accept that motherhood doesn't end when they stop needing you. It just changes shape. And when little Grace said her first word a year later, "Nana," I laughed through tears. Because somehow, in her small voice, I heard everything I'd been waiting for. The cycle had come full circle. What I learned when the house fell silent. Sometimes I still wake up early out of habit, expecting to hear a young boy's footsteps rushing down the hallway, calling, "Mom, where's my backpack?" But the house stays still now. And that's okay. I've learned that silence isn't loneliness when you've made peace with your memories. It's just a space, wide and calm, where gratitude can finally breathe. There was a time when I believed motherhood ended the moment your child stopped calling you mom. But now I know better. It doesn't end. It evolves. It shifts quietly from holding their hand to holding them in prayer, from teaching them how to walk to watching them build their own home. It's still love, just a different shape of it. I think often about that day I stood at Ethan's doorway, suitcase in hand, hearing him say, "Thanks, Margaret." It used to break me. Now it just reminds me how far we've come, how human we all are, messy, scared, trying to love the best way we know how. We don't always get it right. Sometimes we hurt the people who raised us because we don't yet understand what it took for them to love us. And sometimes parents hold on too tightly because they don't know who they are without their children. But life has a way of softening those edges, if we let it. When I visit Ethan now, little Grace runs to the door yelling, "Nana's here!" And Ethan laughs, watching her with the same kind of love I once watched him with. I catch his eyes sometimes. There's a quiet apology there, but also peace. We don't talk about the years we lost. We don't have to. We talk about her, about Grace's drawings, her favorite songs, the way she insists on having strawberry milk every night. And somehow, that's enough. It's as if love decided to start over through her tiny hands. One evening, while tucking Grace into bed, she asked me, "Nana, were you my daddy's mommy too?" I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, I still am." She frowned thoughtfully. "Then why do you look sad when you say that?" I took her small hand and said softly, "Because love makes you feel everything, my dear, even the things you thought you'd forgotten." She nodded, her little eyes heavy with sleep. "Then love is brave," she whispered. I kissed her forehead and whispered back, "Yes, love is very brave." Sometimes, when I walk through my garden back in Portland, I stop by the daffodils I planted that lonely spring. They still bloom every year, bright, stubborn, alive. They remind me of something my own mother once told me. Flowers don't bloom because they forget the winter. They bloom because they survived it. And I suppose that's what I did too. I survived the winter of silence. I learned to forgive without hearing the words, "I'm sorry." I learned to love my son not for who he used to be, but for who he's still becoming. And I learned to love myself again, as a woman, not just a mother. If anyone listening to my story finds themselves standing in that same quiet house, waiting for a call that doesn't come, I want you to remember this. Your worth isn't measured by how often they visit, or how many times they say your name. It's measured by the love you've given, the kind that shapes lives even after you're not there to see it. Because love doesn't vanish. It lingers, in the recipes they remember, in the lessons they pass down, in the warmth they give to others. It lives on quietly, like the echo of your voice calling them home. And maybe one day, when they say mom again, or when their own child calls them by that name, they'll finally understand.